I'm Celine, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my monthly media log for the month of February. This month I didn't bring in a whole bunch, which is good, and I feel like I read a good bit. I really got into reading novels this month. I just wasn't really excited about reading novels for like the past couple of months. And just like with the holidays and everything, I was like busy, and usually novels take me a little bit of time to get through, but that changed and I read 3 novels this month, which I've never done that before. I mean, no, I've never done that before. I was not a reader up until like a couple of years ago. So yeah, I've never done this before. So yeah, anyway, I think I'm gonna go ahead and start with the haul, because I feel like that's the smallest portion of this video, and then we'll go on to my media log. All right, so everything except for one of the books that I got this month was from a local used bookstore, which I discovered this month, and I'm like so excited about it. It's really nicely laid out, and that's like one of my new favorite places to go to. So I've gone there once, but I started off by picking this series up. I've never really heard of it before, but the spines just kind of like called out to me. Like, they're gorgeous and like neutral, and Irish country doctor and just countryside, that just stuck out to me. So I've never heard of this series before, but this is the first book here. I have just had some slippery fingers lately. I cannot hold anything. This is the first book. This is An Irish Country Doctor, and this is by Patrick Taylor, which I guess this once upon a time was a really kind of more well-known series. And when I say series, there are like a good 15 books in this world, which I am kind of intimidated by, but also maybe these characters are really like amazing and I'll want to read like all 15 to 20 books that there are out in this franchise. Yeah, I haven't gotten to reading this one yet. I'm kind of hesitant to start this just because this is the first book, and then I believe this is like the 12th book, and this one is the 9th. So I just have the first one, and from the research that I did, I think it would be best to read the books in the way that they were published, just because, I mean, we have here An Irish Country Doctor. This is kind of like what first starts everything, and then this one, An Irish Country Love Story, and then after this there's like An Irish Country Courtship, and then An Irish Country Wedding. And so I feel like you kind of want to read these in order, at least for like the romance part of it. So yeah, we'll see when I end up starting this. I'm hoping that maybe I can I'm hoping that I can find some of the other books whenever I stop back at that store, or maybe online on like thrift books or something. But this was an interesting find. And lastly, from that store, I picked up a copy of The Book Thief. This is one that I've heard so much about, and it really appealed to me because it's a historical fiction, which is my favorite genre to read, and it's set specifically in the time of World War II, 1939 Nazi Germany. And that is just, I love historical fiction of any kind, really, but specifically World War II, that era. I love reading about that, even like nonfiction. So of course I had to pick this one up. Pretty much any World War II historical fiction that I can find, I'm probably gonna read it. And this one, I'll save my thoughts for the wrap up because I did read this month. It did not disappoint, but yes, I was so happy to find this one. Lastly, for the haul, I picked this up at Barnes & Noble, and you are going to be getting a kind of video extended from this, if that makes sense. I'm going to do a video where I try out maybe like 3 to 5 different fantasy fiction books. It is a new genre for me that I am trying out. I've held off with fantasy for so long because it's honestly intimidated me. I just feel like with fantasy, there's a lot of like heavy world building and like very rich characters and just like complex worlds, and so it feels like something that you need a big brain for and like a lot of brain power for. And sometimes when I read, I don't want to be like piecing all these things together and trying to remember these like complex names of these different kingdoms and all of that. Anyway, so that is why I've kind of stayed away from fantasy for other reasons as well. But I decided, you know what, I feel open to it, so I'm gonna go ahead and try. And I picked this up. This is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, which I have heard so much about, and I thought it was a good one to start out with because it kind of fit into a genre that I already like. This is kind of a historical fiction fantasy. It sounds kind of hokey, like when I'll tell you the premise of this in the wrap up, it sounds kind of like that could be really bad, which I had my worries with it, but I'm saving my thoughts. Anyway, yeah, I picked this one up and I think it's a good one to start with, at least from somebody who's completely new to fantasy. And this is a YA fantasy actually, which I'm happy that I started out with this, and I think that I might just go forward with going into fantasy in the YA section, and I'll maybe explain more of that when I do kind of like the dedicated video to fantasy books. So I'm going to start out with the things that I have watched this month, which I've only got 2 movies to talk about, and they're in the same movie series. I watched the first 2 Hobbit movies, and I have halfway watched the 3rd Hobbit movie, but I'll talk about that next month. But I decided to finally get into the Lord of the Rings franchise, and I will be picking up the books, and that might be part of that fantasy reading vlog thing. We'll see. But yeah, I finally just decided, let me just sit down and tackle these movies because they are very long. And so it honestly took me like a couple weeks to get through those first 2 movies because they're both almost 3 hours long, and after like an hour and a half I get like tired of sitting down, and I watch it at night, so by the time I get to like the hour point I'm like, okay, it's bedtime. So but so far I'm really enjoying it. I am excited to move on to the like original Lord of the Rings trilogy, so we'll see if I can start that soon, if I can get through the last half of the 3rd Hobbit movie. And I decided to watch the Hobbit movies first, even though they came out after the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, just because I like to watch and read things chronologically. So I was like looking it up, and I asked some friends, they were like, no, maybe you should read or watch The Hobbit first. Lord of the Rings is better, but if you like to watch things chronologically, then start with The Hobbit. So that's what I did. And I really, really enjoy it so far. Hopefully by the end of next month I can come back to you with more thoughts on the entire like Middle Earth franchise and my thoughts on that. Before we get into the books, I'll go ahead and mention my 3 favorite songs of the month. I'll go with I Would If I Could and Wildflowers and Wild Horses by Lainey Wilson, and then Fairy Tale by Alexander Rovak. Is that his name? His last name starts with an R. But that song, I guess, came out probably, when was it? Probably like 2010, 2011, 2012, around that time. And I completely missed it. But I came across it because some people are using it for like book talk and like shorts on YouTube with book characters and to describe like their relationship. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, what is this song? So that's probably my favorite song at the moment is Fairy Tale. So definitely check that one out if you are interested. All right, now we can get to my favorite part, is we get to talk about books and everything that I read. And I read some dang good books that caused me a little bit of emotional distress, but we're going to talk about that later and we're going to ignore that. But oh my gosh, I read such good books this month. And like I was saying in the intro, I read the most that I have ever in a single month. Like novel wise and like page wise, like these are all 3 legitimate over 300 page books, and I read 3 of them this month. I'm like still kind of like mind blown at that fact. I read 1,303 pages this month, which maybe that's like a little bit to those of you who are like super bookworms, but for me, I've never done that and I'm proud, and we will see if I can keep that up. But I am trying to decide on which one I need to talk about first because these were just so good. So I'm gonna start with this one, Divine Rivals, again by Rebecca Ross. This is the first book in the Divine Rivals duology. So there is a second book that you will most likely hear about next month because I need to go pick up that second book ASAP and read it, and I'll probably read it in like a day because I got through this. I read like the first 125 pages in a day, and then I read the rest of the like 200 and some pages the next day. So I could have gotten through it in an entire day, but I just didn't get a chance to that first day. Anyway, this is like a historical fiction fantasy, like I was saying, and it's set in this time. Our 2 main characters, we have Iris and Roman, and they both work for the Oath Gazette, which is basically like a newspaper publisher, and they are both journalists, and they are kind of both after the position of columnist, and so they're kind of competing against each other. This is like an enemies to lovers romance that's in here as well. And they're set in this time. The fantasy element in this is that there is a war going on between 2 gods, Enva and Dacre, however you want to pronounce that, Dacre. And Iris's brother is out fighting in the war. And so to kind of like comfort herself, Iris is writing him letters with a typewriter that she was given by her grandmother, and she knows that they will never reach him, so she just kind of stuffs them away in her wardrobe. But there's some sort of magic going on that her letters end up being received by Roman Kit, her rival at work. So like I was saying, this can sound a little like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be cliche and kind of cringy, and I was like, I had those worries myself, but how Rebecca Ross wrote this, it all works so good, and the pacing in this book was amazing. The only complaint that I would have with this is with the enemies to lovers aspect. I feel like their enemies to lovers transition was relatively quick. Like, I would have liked for there to be a little bit more of that push and pull of angst of enemies to lovers that typically has, that I typically expect from enemies to lovers. But it doesn't bother me enough to be like, I don't like that. Yeah, and the main couple, the banter is so good in this one. And yeah, I really, really enjoy this one. Again, pacing was really good. It kept me hooked and engaged the entire time. Like I was saying, I could have read this in one day because it was just that good. And it was fast-paced in the sense that it kept me interested, and I felt like I could keep reading because there was so much happening and it was developing so well. So yeah, I highly recommend this, at least from a fantasy newbie here. I gave this a 4.75 star rating. And I think it didn't get a 5-star rating just because it was lacking that 5-star feeling, and like with my slight complaint on the pacing of the enemies to lovers, that's kind of like what hindered it from becoming a 5-star, but this was like almost there, but it was so good. All right, these next two books, I am going to read you the synopsis and then try to give you just a brief something about my thoughts on these. Both of these books just left such an emotional scar on me. Both of these have to do with like war and the importance of family and how strong the bond of family goes, and how all of that can just crumble in a time of war and like national disaster. They were at times very hard books to read, but they were written so well. But yeah, these will make you ugly cry, and just, I could not control the amount of tears that were coming out of my eyes. They were just like flooding, and oh my gosh. So yeah, fair warning, if you decide to read either one of these, just be prepared just to be at home or somewhere you feel comfortable sobbing your eyes out. But they are well worth the read. I assure you, if you don't like crying, heck, I don't like crying, but these books, I feel like they were just so good. And on the back of this one, the Washington Post said that this was absorbing and searing, and I feel like that is so true with this one. It just, yeah. So for the synopsis, it says, by her brother's graveside, Liesl Memminger's life is changed when she picks up a single object partially hidden in the snow. It is the Gravedigger's Handbook, left there by accident, and it is her first act of book thievery. So begins a love affair with books and words as Liesl, with the help of her accordion-playing foster father, learns to read. Soon, she is stealing books from Nazi book burnings, the mayor's wife's library, wherever there are books to be found. But these are dangerous times. When Liesl's foster family hides a Jew in their basement, Liesl's world is both opened up and closed down. So, this book, how do I even begin to describe this? What's interesting is that this book is kind of narrated and is in the perspective of death, kind of like this grim reaper type character. And I'll actually show you the first page here of the prologue. You see these kind of like cutaways here. That's where it like breaks off into kind of like thoughts and words from the perspective of death, and he's like speaking directly to the reader. And so it was kind of interesting for me at first. The first like 100 pages, I would say, I was kind of trying to get used to that. But then after a while, I really just kind of got into it, and it really worked for me, and I thought that it was really interesting having Death be the kind of narrator for this story. You know, just with the premise of it being in time of war. But yeah, the found, would that be found family? The relationship that the little girl, Liesel Lemminger, has to build with this foster family is so amazing to just read that progression on how she first comes to them and she is scared to be away from her mom, obviously so, right? And then she slowly, that becomes her family, and that is so beautiful to see in her relationship with her foster father, and he teaches her how to read. The friendship, the group of friends in this community that she makes, they're all kind of little punks, little turds, but it's so fun to read about their friendship and how, you know, the innocence of childhood, even though they're living in a time of war, they don't understand everything that's going on. And you see just that pure innocence in their childhood. And by the end of this book, they're a little bit older. Yeah, just this was written so, so well. I really liked the kind of different perspective on it. Very heavy read though. No trigger warnings, I would say. There's no trigger warnings with this, but there's just a lot of loss, and like I was saying, absorbing and searing. It just very, very much an emphasis on searing, but it was so, so good. Now for the rating on this. I wrote down that I gave it a 4.5, but honestly, as I've kind of like been sitting here reading the synopsis and just kind of like remembering my reading experience with this, I'm gonna give this a 5-star. 5-star read, really good. I didn't have a problem with anything in it. I think just initially when I finished this, I didn't have that like, oh my gosh, like 5-star feeling. By the end of this book, I was just like a sobbing, blubbery mess, and I was just like, I felt the loss in this so personally, that maybe I was like, I don't know what was going through my head, but I'm gonna switch my 4.5 rating to a 5-star rating. So highly, highly recommend this if you like historical fiction. All right, and lastly, we have another kind of like historical fiction wartime story. Those tend to be my favorite. I don't know why. I think they're just so, there's a lot of emotion and a lot of heartstrings that can be pulled and a lot of impact that can be made in these type of stories. And this is one that I feel like was done so well. Like I did not have one single issue with this. This is As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by, I don't want to butcher her name, so by this author. This is mind-blowing to me that this was her debut novel. How does somebody write this as their first book? Usually, like, I would imagine the first book to be kind of like messy, kind of choppy, but this just flowed so well. The characters were absolutely amazing. And yeah, anyway, let me read you the synopsis on this one. It starts off with, "This is my land, and just like the lemon trees that have been growing here for centuries, spilled blood won't stop us." Salama Kassab was a pharmacy student when the cries for freedom broke out in Syria. She still had her parents and her big brother. She still had her home and an average teenager's life. Now, Salama volunteers at a hospital in Homs, helping the wounded who flood through the doors daily. Secretly, though, she is desperate to find a way out of her beloved country before her best friend and sister-in-law, Layla, gives birth. As her desperation grows, her PTSD takes physical shape in the form of companion Kaf, who haunts her every move. But even with Kaf pressing her to leave, Salama is torn between loyalty to her country and her will to survive. Salama must contend with bullets and bombs, military assaults, and her shifting sense of morality before she might finally breathe free. And when she crosses paths with the boy she was supposed to meet one faithful day, she starts to doubt her resolve in leaving home at all. Salama must learn to see the events around her for what they truly are, not a war, but a revolution, and decide how she too will cry for Syria's freedom. Oh my gosh. The memories that I had with this book are just like all flooding back to me right now. And I mean, this story is just, it's a story of family and just chaos, the chaos of a revolution, and loss and love as well. There is a romance in here, which sometimes I feel kind of funny reading a kind of wartime sort of book that has romance in it, because I feel like sometimes it can be a little bit misplaced or distasteful sometimes, even to put a romance in, you know, some sort of content with the severity of events like this one has. But I think that the author did a really good job tying this one in to where it felt very realistic, and it didn't feel like, okay, she's just kind of trying to push a romance in here and it's kind of like, maybe you shouldn't have put that in here. I didn't get that feeling at all. I mean, with Salama and Kenan, they both have their own things that they're going through. They both have their own families that they're trying to support, and a whole bunch of responsibilities that are put onto their shoulders all of a sudden. They were just regular teenagers living their life. I mean, before the revolution started, Salama was in pharmacy school, and when the revolution started, she ended up having to step up to the role of being a full-on doctor and surgeon because there was just that lack of help in hospitals. So she's just, her PTSD and everything were really in her head throughout this story. We see everything from her point of view, and seeing how she just has to pull it all together when she goes to work is insane. She just has so much on her shoulders and so much that she's going through with the loss that she's already experienced. I mean, her dad and her brother from the beginning of this book, they've been imprisoned they went out to do like a protest for the revolution, and before they were taken away, her brother brought her aside and he was like, if something happens to me, if I don't come back, I need you to promise me that you're going to take care of my wife, which is her best friend also. And she's like, of course, you know, and sadly that became her reality. So she's got a lot going on. He's got a lot going on, but you just see how as the events just continue to unfold and just chaos after chaos after chaos just comes their way, you see how they just continuously show up for each other and just genuinely care for one another so much. I mean, and it's not like they weren't not attracted to each other, right? They were definitely attracted to each other at, you know, to a certain extent, but their romance and their love was just such a pure love. Like, I feel like in this book I read about true love, like that genuinely I felt that way with the two of them, and just how it was roped into this story. It was beautiful. Their love story was just absolutely beautiful, and it fit so well, and just, yeah, how they constantly just show up for one another, and if the other one is down, the other one picks them right back up. It's not like 50-50. It's like, okay, if you've got 30%, I'll bring 70%, that type of thing. Their romance was just beautiful again. So yeah, the romance was done really, really well, and just with the subject matter in this, I think it was done really well as well. You have them kind of like debating on how, if they should stay in their home country or if it's best for them to just leave, and you see that push and pull in their thoughts, and it's it's truly amazing. I highly recommend you read this book, even if you're kind of like new to this kind of like war fiction genre. I really, really recommend this one. I found no fault in this book, like literally none. So without even having to say, but I'm gonna say it anyway, this was like a 6 out of 5 star read. This was absolutely amazing, very heavy, but just beautiful. Sometimes you were just like happy crying, but it's very bittersweet at times. And yeah, I recommend that you read this, but just be prepared for the amount of heaviness that this has. I was warned before I read this book, but I kind of like underestimated. I was like, okay, like I'll read it. And I knew that it was going to be a heavy read, but once I got into it, I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, just kind of be warned that it can be a little bit bloody and all of that, just with her being a doctor at this hospital that wounded soldiers and civilians are being brought to after bomb attacks and everything like that. So it can be kind of difficult to read at times. So be warned, but read this book, please. But that is it for this video. Definitely some great reads this month. I'm looking at picking up some hopefully great reads in the month of March. I hope that I can have as good of a reading month, if not better, next month, but we'll see. I think if I were to pick a favorite this month, oh, that's hard. I was like, I want to go for this one. You know, I'm gonna go with this one. Oh, and I didn't even tell you my rating for this one. This one was a 5-star read. Obviously, if you couldn't gather that, I think it wasn't even, I didn't even need to say it. This was just a 5-star read. It was perfect. In all honesty, if a book can be like, this was as close to perfect as you're gonna get in a book, in my opinion. Anyways, this is my favorite thing that I experienced this month. I love this book. But let me know what your favorite read or favorite thing that you watched or favorite song that you listened to this month in the comments. And I will see you hopefully in March with that fantasy vlog soon, or maybe that might come out in April. I don't know, but whenever I next see you, I will see you then. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.